When investigators arrived at the scene that cold November morning, they weren't prepared for what they were about to discover. The call had come in just after 7 a.m. A concerned neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed that her friend hadn't picked up his newspaper for 2 days straight. Something felt wrong, she'd told the dispatcher. And she was right, but it wasn't just the death itself that would puzzle everyone involved. It was the expression on the victim's face, a peaceful, almost serene smile that seemed completely out of place in a death investigation. Detective Sarah Mitchell had seen her fair share of unusual cases during her 15 years on the force. But this one was different from the start. The victim was identified as Robert Chen, a 42-year-old software engineer who lived alone in a modest apartment on the city's east side. He was known in his building as a quiet, friendly man who kept to himself but always had a kind word for his neighbors. When officers entered the apartment, everything appeared normal at first glance. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The furniture sat undisturbed, picture frames remained straight on the walls, and a half-finished cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter. Long since gone cold, Robert was found in his favorite armchair, positioned by the window that overlooked the small park across the street. His hands were folded gently in his lap. His eyes were closed, and on his face, that smile. It was peaceful, Detective Mitchell would later recall, almost like he'd simply drifted off to sleep while thinking of something pleasant. But the question that haunted us was simple. What happened here? The medical examiner's initial assessment ruled out any obvious signs of foul play. There were no wounds, no bruising, and no indication of poisoning from the preliminary examination. Robert's body showed no defensive injuries, nothing that suggested he'd fought for his life or struggled in any way. Toxicology tests were ordered immediately, but results would take weeks. In the meantime, Detective Mitchell and her team began piecing together the last days of Robert Chen's life. They started with the basics: phone records, bank statements, social media activity, security footage from the apartment building and nearby businesses. Every detail mattered, no matter how small. What they discovered was a life that seemed by all accounts perfectly ordinary. Robert went to work each day. He had a small circle of friends. He enjoyed hiking on weekends and was an active member of a local photography club. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Nothing suggested a reason for his sudden death. But then they found the journal. Hidden in plain sight on Robert's bookshelf, tucked between a collection of mystery novels and photography guides, was a leather-bound journal. The entries inside would change everything about how investigators viewed this case. The journal went back nearly 6 months. In it, Robert documented what he described as a profound personal journey. He wrote about philosophy, about the meaning of life, and about his search for something he called true contentment. One entry, dated 3 months before his death, read, "I've spent so much of my life chasing things I thought would make me happy. A better job, more money, the perfect relationship. But I'm starting to realize that happiness isn't something you chase. It's something you choose. Every single day, it's a choice." The entries became increasingly introspective as time went on. Robert wrote about meditation practices he'd started, books he was reading on Buddhist philosophy and Stoic wisdom. He described feeling more at peace than he ever had before. But it was the final entry. Dated the night before he died, that sent chills down Detective Mitchell's spine. "Tomorrow, I think I'll finally understand. I'm not afraid anymore. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. I feel nothing but gratitude for this life and curiosity about what lies beyond. If this is the end, then I've made my peace with it. And if it's just another beginning, then I welcome it with open arms." The journal raised more questions than it answered. Was Robert suicidal? Had he planned his own death? But if so, how? The medical examiner found no evidence of drugs, no signs of suffocation, and no indication of any physical cause of death. Detective Mitchell ordered a more thorough investigation of the apartment. They brought in specialized teams. Crime scene analysts combed through every inch of the space. They tested for unusual substances, checked air quality, and examined the ventilation system. Still, nothing. They interviewed everyone who knew Robert. His co-workers described him as happier than usual in recent months. His friends from the photography club said he seemed at peace with himself. His neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, mentioned that he'd seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. No one reported any concerning behavior. No one thought he was depressed or suicidal. If anything, people commented on how much he seemed to be enjoying life lately. The case was becoming stranger by the day. When the full toxicology report finally came back, it showed nothing unexpected. No drugs, legal or illegal. No poisons. No toxic substances of any kind. Robert Chen's body was, by all medical standards, that of a healthy middle-aged man who simply stopped living. The medical examiner consulted with specialists. Cardiologists examined his heart for defects. Neurologists looked for signs of stroke or aneurysm. Pathologists ran every test they could think of. But the results were always the same. There was no clear medical explanation for his death. The official cause of death was eventually listed as sudden cardiac death of unknown origin. But even the medical examiner admitted this was more of an admission of defeat than an actual explanation. Sometimes, she told Detective Mitchell, the human body just stops. We don't always know why. It's rare, but it happens. Perhaps his heart simply gave out. But why he was smiling? That I cannot tell you. As word of the unusual case spread, theories began to emerge. Some were scientific, others bordered on the supernatural, and a few were simply wild speculation. One theory suggested that Robert had achieved some kind of meditative state so deep that his body simply shut down. Researchers pointed to rare cases of monks who had supposedly died during meditation, their bodies remaining preserved for days afterward. Another theory proposed that he'd experienced a massive release of endorphins or other neurochemicals, creating a sense of euphoria so intense that his brain couldn't handle it. But there was no evidence to support this hypothesis. Some people believed his death was connected to something spiritual, that he'd achieved some kind of enlightenment and simply transcended. His journal entries certainly suggested someone on a spiritual journey, but could thoughts alone actually cause death? The scientific community remained skeptical of supernatural explanations, but they couldn't offer a better alternative. Robert Chen had died, apparently of natural causes, while experiencing what could only be described as profound peace or happiness. And that smile, it remained the case's most haunting detail. In the months following Robert's death, Detective Mitchell found herself returning to the case again and again. It was officially closed, marked as death by natural causes, but it bothered her, not because she suspected foul play, but because she wanted to understand. She read Robert's journal cover to cover multiple times. She researched meditation and philosophy, trying to understand what he'd been searching for. And slowly, she began to see the case in a different light. Perhaps this wasn't a mystery to be solved in the traditional sense. Perhaps it was simply the story of a man who'd found something rare in this world. Peace, acceptance, contentment with whatever life or death might bring. We spend so much time fearing death, Mitchell reflected during a late-night conversation with her partner. But what if Robert had truly made peace with it? What if he'd reached a point where death held no terror for him? Maybe that smile was just acceptance. The case of Robert Chen, the man found dead with a smile on his face, remains officially unsolved in terms of finding a definitive medical cause. But perhaps the real mystery isn't how he died, but how he lived. Especially in those final months, his journal entries suggest a man who'd stopped running from life's biggest questions and started embracing them. He'd confronted his own mortality and, instead of fear, found peace. He'd given up the endless chase for external validation and started looking inward for contentment. In our modern world, where we're constantly distracted, constantly striving, constantly worried about the future or dwelling on the past, Robert's story offers something unusual, a reminder that true peace comes from within, that acceptance, not avoidance, might be the path to real happiness. Whether you believe Robert Chen died of natural causes, achieved some kind of meditative state that stopped his heart, or experienced something we simply can't explain with current medical knowledge, one thing remains certain. He left this world the way most of us hope to, at peace, without pain, and apparently without fear.